Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to take the column that we made in the last video and fracture it using geometry nodes. We're going to take our column generator that we made last tutorial and distribute some points on the faces with a cut object on those points. Then we're going to boolean and cut out the cut objects from this, and then the final step here is to select the inside faces. We start with a grid. With this grid, we want to set its position and do that by a noise texture. If you want to add a node, Shift A, add a noise texture. I have these settings for my noise texture, and I'm going to plug that color right into the offset. And right now you can see it's not really doing too good. So we have our grid, and with this you can change the size, you can change the resolution. This is what you'll get whenever you first put it in. What's happening is, instead of the position of the grid being stuck at 0, if I plug this directly into the offset, it shifts it up. As if you look closer here, say this is the space our noise texture is taking up. Currently it is set as our noise texture is going from 0. It's going from 0 to 1. So we need to just uncheck normalize, and that gets us back to where we need to be. Now it's still way too strong. We're going to add a vector scale. It's just a vector math set to scale, and I like the scale of about 0.25. Say you want to control this for our size. I think 5 is going to be good on X and the Y. For our resolution, I think I might even go to 100 on this. So now you see the resolution and the size, and we've set our position based on this factor. Now we have controllers for our noise scale, resolution, and size. So the next thing that we're going to do after this is extrude this mesh by a specific amount, which is going to be our thickness. Plug that in and see what it looks like. What that does is it just extrudes our mesh up just a little bit. So now you can see it's giving it thickness, but you want this at a really small value. So I like 0.001 for that. All right, so the next thing, so I've got all of the faces being extruded up, but I do not have the original mesh. So we're just going to join these two together. Join geometry, we can look at that, and it joins it too. So let's plug this thickness back into our offset scale. So we have what we want again. The next thing, flip the faces of this one. So if I turn on face orientation, this face right here has the wrong normals. Flipping that face, so everything is in the proper normal direction. Now we have a little cube that is displaced with a noise texture that we can use to cut our mesh. So the general idea behind this thing is we have our object. So we're going to distribute points on faces. As many points as you'd like to have on here. I would recommend a low value. Leave it at 1. That's probably good enough. So it produces the right amount of cut objects. So this is kind of bulky. So I'm going to hit Control G to group that, and then I'm going to stick a scale into here, our resolution into here, our size into here, and our there. If you hit N, that pulls up this panel here, which you can rename all of these. This scale is going to be noise scale. This is going to be our resolution. The next one is size, and this offset scale is our thickness. Hit tab to get out of that. So I'm going to copy those, bring them out here, and then just copy the values for each of these. So this yellow node now is our cut object. We want to instance this cut object on to some points. What points? These points. We're going to plug that in to here, and then plug this in to here. Now we have this. We've got random distribution of our grid on our cylinder, but you can't see it right now because for visualization purposes, join geometry, that they're instanced on our column. It would be kind of boring if we had it cut in slices like this. So now that we have this object distributed on our cylinder, we need to adjust the rotation, but I don't want to adjust the rotation for all of them at once, so I put in a random value. Something that I like to do for my final node setup, I want to put this into a group input for our seed, and then stick that in there for both this seed and this seed. So that way we can adjust this to get different distributions, because the Boolean operation is a little bit finicky and it doesn't work perfectly every single time. So just like we did in the last episode, column generator, where we unified these objects, we are now going to use these objects to cut out and fracture our column. So if you add that random rotation in there, it gives you a whole bunch of different chunks, but we don't want to see these. These only need to be used as a cut object. Whenever you're using cut objects and Boolean operations in Blender, you want to plug the initial geometry into mesh 1. Have this set to exact or manifold depending on what you're using. Manifold means that the mesh is completely closed, and that is a different setting for this that gives you better operations, but in this case we have something that's not manifold here. Our grid is not manifold, so we change this to exact and make sure we have self-intersect checked on there. Instead of the one object being plugged in there, we want to be plugged in to the mesh 2. This operation can sometimes take a little bit.
A few moments later.
Alright, so now everything is fractured. And you see here that our crack have some face orientation that's off on here. Sometimes if it doesn't crack the way that you want it to, you can always just change the seed and wait for it to operate again.
A few moments later.
So now we have different cracks on here. If I go inside the mesh and I see any faces like this, when I go to separate all of these pieces, it will cause it to stay stuck together because of these inside faces. We don't want that. What we're going to do, we're going to take seed, change that to 5, see what that does. So that tells us we need to adjust our thickness. It may be a little too thin. You can also adjust your noise scale. If you adjust your noise scale, it can help get rid of some of those at the expense of having your cracks in your geometry be not as squiggly, for lack of a better word. Squiggly is the best word I can use for that. You can also play with the thickness, and that will maybe help a little bit of getting rid of those inside faces. So that way when you want to a rigid body or something like that, it'll be a little bit better. And I think that is just unnoticeable enough. And if you want to visualize, you're most definitely going to want to bake the mesh, and the intersecting edges is going to help us select the inside faces for our material later. That fracture is okay. I think I want to change the density to 3. That's going to give me more points, which means more pieces of the column, which means longer Boolean operation.
A few moments later.
Now that gives me way more fragments. You might be noticing a trend here where it looks like these seem to be going mostly in the same direction, and the reason for that is the same reason as the noise texture from before. So we're going to go into our random value, and I want these to have a random value between negative 360 degrees and positive 360. So instead of just putting 360 on here, because that would be wildly excessive, negative 2 times pi. And it's not going to work because I had caps lock on. I'm going to put negative 2 times pi, and that's going to give me negative 6 radians, and that already looks a lot better. I'm gonna have to shoot myself in the foot again, and on the maximum side do positive 2 times pi, wait for it to do the Boolean operation again.
2,000 years later.
Okay, so now that you've waited your entire life to have this Boolean operation happen, we are going to now, I think I like it, I think I like the way that it's broken. It's pretty cool looking. We are going to now wait an eternity.
1 eternity later.
And bake, which is going to take the same amount of time that it's been taking. Okay, now that your bun is out of the oven, metaphorically speaking, we have our intersecting edges and our baked instance. A good way to see if you've successfully fractured your column is to add a scale elements node. And we are going to put this at like 0.5. If it looks like this, you're good. Sometimes it will try to scale the entire thing. So now you should be able to see the inside faces. And what's apparent here is that the intersecting edges that it gives you isn't really giving us the inside faces. It's giving the edges that are cut.
The way that I'm getting the inside faces for this, I'm taking the original geometry of our column and extruding the mesh inward to get this monstrosity, which sits inside of the mesh. And what that does is allow me to get the position of it and the position of the nearest normal and get the distance between those. If we view that on this right here, this is kind of what that looks like. And it gives us mostly what we want, but you can see here that these top faces are also being selected. So I sent this through a map range node and then also a greater than node, and the threshold for this greater than node is the intersecting edges from our boolean, and that gives us something that looks kind of like this. But if we mute this, you can see it doesn't quite get everything that we want, like these faces right here are not selected and these faces down here are not selected. I put that through a blur to blur it and then another greater than to get a more accurate reading here. And in order to get these faces up here and this face or these faces down here, I get the position and then I separate the XYZ of that to give us our Z component, which goes from 0 to 1 based on the world origin. And then I plug that into a combine XYZ, send that vector out through a greater than, which gives me this, which lets me select these top faces. And now that I know that this works for the top faces, I can just take it and select these bottom faces with this color ramp right here. You can also select the top faces with a color ramp if you would like to do that. I just find this way is a little bit easier. Then I add those two together. We have something that looks like this. Be great to use this type of mask for like snow or something that is on it. It's a good way to select specifically what faces you want a material or an attribute to be on. Then I take that and I add it to the other one that we had, and now we have most of our faces selected that we would like. Finally, I send that through a blur attribute node to just blur it a little bit, and then store that as our inside attribute. If you want to view this, you can scale the elements down to see the inside here, and then add a named attribute node set to inside, and then view that attribute, and that gives us all of this. And as you can see here, most of the parts that are selected are inside faces. This is going to give us enough variety on our mesh whenever we make this the material, and I can show you that.
Final step is to set your material and send it out. I'm going to leave the scale instances node there so you can see the faces. Now we can jump in the material, and I'm going to go into render mode here. I am rendering in cycle with my GPU, and you can see we kind of already have this going on here. So now that I have that store named attribute inside, I can go ahead and add a material to this mesh, and I'm going to select my column material, just show you a quick breakdown of what's happening here. Looks like here is that it got inverted, so we're just going to put an invert color there, and now the column looks and you can see some of the faces, the inside faces, have the other material on it, and it's kind of blended. And I just have a noise texture with a color ramp going into a mix node with linear light. That's going to mix our ambient occlusion with that, just to give it some grime in certain areas. And that goes into another mix node as the factor for two different colors. This right here is just a bump setup for the normals here. And then the inside faces are going into this mix shader node with this other setup here with similar things. Just one solid base color here. And then I have a noise texture ×2 setup for my normals. So that's pretty much going to do it for the material.
these inside faces here and here, and then there's some of them that are not selected how we want. If you know a better way to do this, just drop it in the comments. And so now that we have our inside faces selected, we can go ahead and apply this modifier. We'll go save, and then we will make sure we have in our unused stored there and hit apply all. So now if you go into edit mode and you hover over one part of it, hit L to select the linked faces, you can move that out and see that your fracture is complete.
Now we have it with no geometry nodes on it, and we are going to jump into add a plane, apply the scale, and setting up a rigid body simulation on this for the next YouTube video. As always, thanks for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, hit that like and subscribe, and stick around for the next video where we go over rigid body simulation, smoke, and dust.